Their fancy dealership verdict? $200,000. 8 luxury SUVs flashing identical fault codes, one devastating estimate. But Margaret Holloway refused to sign. Instead, she called me, the mechanic the dealership fired 18 months prior. I had submitted a technical bulletin on this exact diagnostic issue, just to watch the director bury it and show me the door. Tonight I stood alone inside my small Chicago repair shop. One diagnostic scanner in my hand, a $14 fuse resting nearby. I lost everything for seeing what others missed. Now I was about to prove exactly what true experience looks like. Stick with me here. What we uncovered that night will change how you and I look at auto repair bills forever. That morning crept in cold and gray over Chicago's Halsted Street. The kind of bitter November chill that sinks right into the concrete and brick, refusing to leave until sometime around March. I opened up the garage at 6:45, just like always, jiggling the side door open with a key that stuck on the third turn, flipping the shop lights, in sequence front to back, cranking the old wall heater up from its low overnight setting, then waiting out 3 minutes of groaning metal before it finally committed to giving off heat. My auto repair business occupied a narrow service bay wedged firmly between a Vietnamese grocery and a dry cleaner, on a block seeing way more foot traffic than actual cars. The sort of humble storefront most folks walk blindly past without looking. But inside, the mechanic tools along the left wall sat arranged with a strict precision that felt almost too serious for such a tiny space. Every socket locked in its rail, every torque wrench hung up, every automotive diagnostic cable neatly coiled instead of lazily draped. My master scan station beside the auto lift was the newest thing in the building. Grabbed it secondhand from a failed dealership 2 years ago. I renewed its expensive software licenses every January, no matter how tight money got. I made that a priority. You and I know that in a small shop, real credibility comes from what you can physically point to, not from bragging or making empty promises about yourself. The testing equipment made the argument. My apprentice Lucas rolled in at 7, peeling off his jacket and dropping his bag near the main lift post. He was 26, freshly trained at a local vocational program, and 2 years into an auto trade he was still figuring out. Reliable in that rare way young mechanics are, right before the car business teaches them to cut corners. He asked questions when confused, admitted when he needed guidance, and never faked his expertise. Up in the tiny customer waiting area near the front doors, divided from our noisy service bay by a half wall of glass, my young daughter, Grace, had crashed out in the corner chair, school jacket over her shoulder, backpack tucked safely under her feet. Her school closed for the snowstorm, and the neighbor who usually watched her on short notice was traveling. I had carefully draped a folded shop blanket over her without waking her up. Neither Lucas nor I brought it up again. The garage ran on a quiet respect for the messy shape of my daily life. And on freezing mornings like today, that simple understanding was enough. The phone rang at 8:17. Margaret Holloway introduced herself with zero small talk. Founder of Morrison Capital Group, a wealthy private investment firm headquartered 3 miles north on Michigan Avenue. Let's look at her problem together, a mechanical headache brewing for nearly 3 weeks. She owned 8 luxury Bentley Bentayga speed models. These luxury cars were under a strict service contract, used only to drive VIP clients to high-stakes meetings and airports. Events demanding total reliability and a very specific kind of quiet. All 8 Bentleys went to Vance Prestige Auto Group on the exact same service date in mid-November for their routine dealership maintenance. All 8 came back with perfectly clean paperwork. Yet within 14 days of rejoining her fleet, every single car threw critical fault codes. That morning she got the repair estimate, $200,000 total, $25,000 each. They wanted to completely replace the advanced driver assistance module in every single vehicle, along with full sensor recalibration and extensive road testing. The quote was highly detailed and perfectly formatted, handed over with that smug dealership authority that expects zero pushback from the owner. But she refused to sign it. The math just didn't sit right with her. 8 luxury cars. Same exact dashboard warnings, same proposed fixes, same massive repair bill. All failing within a 2-week window after the exact same service that stopped her cold. You and I both know the truth here. Perfect symmetry like that is never a coincidence. I sat and listened without interrupting. When she finished, I just asked two things. What were the specific error codes? And had these cars been driven hard in the winter cold since their service? She read straight off the dealer invoice, 14 separate codes per car, all clustered in the advanced driver assistance system, flagging the entire camera array. The front and back radar sensors, the stability control processor, plus the emergency braking unit. I asked her to describe exactly how the dashboard warning lights looked the second those errors popped up. She told me they lit up simultaneously, all 14 errors at once. Like someone flipped a master switch, not a slow chain reaction of individual mechanical failures. I went completely quiet, a lot longer than she probably expected from an independent specialist taking a massive business inquiry. I finally told her I would take the case. I didn't mention that my silence was actually me recognizing a very specific pattern I'd documented 2 years ago, only to watch the dealership bury it before it helped anyone. I spent 4 years working at Vance Prestige, starting as a senior tech on European luxury cars, eventually becoming their lead Bentley diagnostician, handling Porsche and McLaren platforms across the Auto Group's massive main facility. Back in September 2022, I was checking two Bentleys with weird driver assistance bugs during cold starts. I dug up an obscure factory technical bulletin directly from Bentley Motors North America. The official document designated. Listen closely. Bulletin 2023-441 identified a known auxiliary power failure pattern. It was thermal fuse 47, a $14 part hidden away in a secondary junction box, buried right under the rear cargo floor. It would slowly degrade during heavy winter driving in a way that looked perfectly fine in a warm shop, only failing under a heavy thermal load. Right when the engine finally hit its maximum operating temperature, the internal resistance of that tiny fuse would spike, choking the voltage across the main rail that fed the entire advanced driver assistance system. It wasn't a catastrophic power failure, just a flicker, not a hard system shutdown, but enough to blindside every single sensor and processor on that circuit straight into a fault frenzy. The bulletin clearly ordered replacing fuse 47 before doing any module level diagnostic or part swapping on any luxury SUV in that specific model year window. I had gathered my diagnostic data from 2 shop cars, backed up the failure pattern using voltage logs and thermals, pinned the service bulletin. Then I handed that entire repair package to my director, officially suggesting we add fuse 47 to the winter checklist for every affected Bentega that rolled in. My boss, Jason Mercer, shot back his reply in less than 48 hours. Not applicable to our current inventory, do not escalate. 3 months later, I found myself fired from the Vance Prestige Auto Group dealership. My official personnel file blamed a quote, lack of teamwork. I printed both of those emails the afternoon before my final shift and buried them inside a manila folder at the bottom of my cabinet. Not because I planned some grand revenge, but because you and I know certain things just need a paper trail, especially when the big guys want to sweep facts away. I hadn't touched that folder since then. The 18 months between that firing and this phone call were the kind that never announce themselves as a struggle. They just silently pile up between what you hoped for and what actually happens. I finally opened my own independent shop with savings that barely covered the basics, relying on credit that demanded absolute caution. I built my customer list one referral at a time, doing the repair work right the first time, giving honest explanations, no matter how much that truth cost my wallet. I wrenched on every single car rolling into my bays, turning zero away because broke men can't be picky. There were late nights where I just sat at that very same workbench after Grace finally slept, grinding through service quotes. That shorted me $40 an hour, because eating $40 beats staring at an empty auto lift. I never brought any of this struggle up with Lucas. I honestly didn't talk about it with anyone. That folder stayed hidden away, those printed emails stayed buried. So I spent a solid 1.5 years mastering this craft, spotting the exact hidden truths that those massive shiny dealerships decided were simply too profitable to properly fix. Margaret scheduled the very first test vehicle to arrive by noon. It rolled off a flatbed, a silver Bentega, 31,000 miles, boasting a spotless recently serviced engine bay. All maintenance records completely current, the paint flawless. But the second Lucas turned the key, that digital dashboard exploded into 14 glowing red system errors. I calmly plugged my scanner straight into the OBD port. Let's watch the computer run a full diagnostic sweep before judging. 14 active fault codes stacked up, all tracing to one network family: camera obstruction failure. Dead radar module, electronic stability control completely locked out. Automatic emergency braking disabled, lane keep assist dead offline. Plus 9 other errors crying about the exact same underlying electrical ghost. Yet not a single code flagged the engine management module, the automatic transmission, the air suspension, or the physical brakes. Stick with me, this luxury vehicle's mechanics looked entirely unremarkable. I checked the sensor housings, 0 impact marks, no moisture trapped behind the camera glass. Honestly, I couldn't find a single trace of physical damage anywhere. Not one component had failed in a physically obvious way. My tech Lucas grabbed a stool and scanned the code list. He figured advanced safety faults on this massive scale usually pointed straight to a dead gateway module. Either a shorted comms bus or some serious water damage. Stuff that easily cascades expensive error codes across the network. I just shook my head and told him to look at the specific systems affected. Every single one pulls from that exact same 6-degree power distribution rail. This pattern isn't a communication failure, and it definitely isn't random parts just going bad. The control modules are actually reporting perfectly. They are accurately telling us the power they are getting falls right outside the strict tolerance they need to work. These expensive parts aren't broken. The voltage feeding them is wrong. I grabbed my diagnostic multimeter and headed to the Bentley's rear. I methodically tested the electrical junction panels in perfect order. Started at the main distribution box under the hood, then moved straight to the auxiliary panel hidden right beneath the rear cargo floor. At 51 degrees ambient, my unheated garage bay felt freezing but dry. Voltage at fuse 47 held at 12.4, perfectly stable. I fired up the engine, let it idle, and clamped a thermocouple probe onto the fuse housing. I monitored both displays as the motor slowly warmed up to operating temp. At 160 it was 12.3. At 175, 12.1. By 182 it tanked to 11.7, holding 0.3 volts below the required spec band. Lucas peeked over my shoulder at the meter and muttered that it was a tiny drop. I told him on most vehicles it is completely irrelevant. But on the Bentega's driver assistance platform, that tiny dip crosses the main processor's absolute confidence threshold. The system needs voltage inside a strictly defined tolerance band to keep signal trust calibrated across every single component on that shared rail. And falling below that edge, the main processor instantly threw simultaneous fault states across every single downstream sensor and module. Not because the actual hardware had failed, but because the brain lost absolute faith in the reliability of the power feeding its vital data. All 14 of those terrifying dashboard warnings were just the car screaming it couldn't trust its own inputs. Not because its cameras were blind, but because the electrical pulse behind them simply wasn't steady anymore. I grabbed fuse 47 with my puller, held it up to the bench light and turned it slowly. The little bridge wire inside actually looked completely intact. 0 discoloration on the casing, no physical melting or warping. You and I know that's how thermal fuse degradation hides. It doesn't announce itself by simply blowing out. It secretly builds resistance through heat cycles, then tests perfectly clean at room temperature. It only choked under real load at high heat, invisibly and silently corrupting every downstream system. So let's grab a $14 replacement fuse from our shelf. Factory original spec, and I snapped it in under 5 minutes. I cleared out the stored codes and restarted the engine. Then I watched that auxiliary rail voltage hold perfectly steady while the engine warmed right up. At 182 degrees, the housing held exactly 12.4 volts, steady throughout. Let's watch him work. He connected the scanner, 0 active faults, 0 stored. He took the Bentley out solo, logging 12 miles of neighborhood stop-and-go traffic before hitting the main roads. Then a stretch of open highway to test the adaptive systems at speed. He came back, scanned it clean, then drove 11 miles the opposite way. Still completely clean. He logged the exact voltage and scan outputs at every single testing stage. He took photos of the old fuse next to the new one, plus odometer readings at every stop. He carefully noted the outside air temperature before every single test drive. He logged the exact housing temperature at the measurement point, the exact time that passed between starting the engine and checking the voltage. He even documented the exact road and traffic conditions for every interval. You and I know this documentation leaves zero room for debate. It's the proof that answers every excuse before it can even be made. Armed with the details others overlooked, he called Margaret Holloway to share exactly what he discovered. He told her precisely what he fixed and exactly how little it cost. Carter Winslow was listening on speakerphone in her office. When Ryan finished, Winslow finally chimed in. An official Bentley dealer with a massive technical staff had looked at these same cars, but their verdict demanded $200,000 in parts. Winslow demanded to know how such a drastically different outcome was even possible. Ryan agreed it was fair. He explained he could not prove if the dealership's massive misdiagnosis was just an accident, whether it was pure sloppy negligence or something completely intentional. But he pointed out that figuring out the difference between those two realities was exactly what Margaret needed to force that expensive dealership to answer for, in writing. By 4 o'clock, Ryan fired off a 12-page diagnostic report to Margaret's email, attaching every log. He included the thermal profiling, scanner records, and clear before and after comparison shots, the exact test drive mileage records, and his final written summary. He advised her to forward the entire file to Vance Prestige with a formal written demand for a line-by-line breakdown of their so-called diagnostic process plus an explanation of how they justified a $25,000 module replacement on every single vehicle, when the real culprit was a $14 fuse explicitly named in a factory bulletin. Margaret fired that damning report straight to Isabella Vance's direct business inbox that afternoon. The subject line was just 2 sharp sentences, utterly impossible to misread. Isabella received the message at 4:47. She clicked the attachment, skimmed the findings for maybe 90 seconds, then forwarded it to Jason Mercer with one line. Fix this mess and get back to me before the day is over. She had 17 unread emails, a board presentation in 31 hours, and a shareholder call starting in 20 minutes. She entirely skipped page 3, overlooking the undeniable voltage data completely. And she completely missed page 9, where Ryan Cole's name sat quietly in the diagnostician box. Jason Mercer checked page 9 first. He recognized that flawless diagnostic structure before his eyes even hit the signature. That precise voltage measurement sequence, the unique thermal profiling methodology. The exact way the fault was framed as a power supply degradation rather than a catastrophic component failure. He had worked right alongside Ryan Cole for 4 solid years. He stared at his desk, frozen for 11 minutes. Finally, he picked up the phone and called Margaret. You see why his voice stayed so measured and professionally patient for 22 minutes. You know how high-end dealers operate. He claimed a fuse swap only masked surface codes, but insisted the ongoing electrical spikes had actually already caused what he called hidden damage to the computer's delicate solid-state parts. The kind of damage you'd never catch on a basic diagnostic scan right away, but damage that would spark unpredictable and flat-out dangerous system crashes on the road within months. He argued the guy fixing it, meaning me, had no official Bentley paperwork and absolutely no permission to touch their covered electronics, and letting some independent outsider poke around the car's brain had legally torched the manufacturer warranty on that car. He pointed out the other 7 cars were untouched, strongly demanding that they head back to Vance Prestige immediately because the combined remaining warranty value across that fleet was roughly $1.4 million, and he couldn't protect that money if an uncertified guy like me intervened. Carter Winslow called me at 6:15 that same evening. He admitted his company was rethinking their entire stance. That massive warranty risk was too heavy to ignore based on one independent mechanic's word. I simply asked for 48 hours. He agreed, sounding like a guy granting a huge favor he knew he'd probably regret. 40 minutes later, stick with me here, Isabella Vance called my shop directly. I picked up the phone. She didn't recognize my name. She became CEO 14 months ago after her father passed. I'd already quit 18 months before that, so we never crossed paths. She sharply warned me that my work on the Morrison fleet was straight up interfering with their active service contracts, and the Vance Prestige legal team was ready to seek a heavy injunction. I calmly told her she was more than welcome to try. I suggested she actually read my diagnostic report before paying corporate lawyers to file anything. She fired back that she'd already reviewed it. I said, page 3 holds a voltage log that pinpoints the real root of the failure. Page 9 lists the guy who actually filed a formal technical bulletin about this exact breakdown to your service director. Back in September 2022, it names the director who read it, buried it, and chose to ignore the truth. I said, I really think those 2 pages are worth your time before making any other decision. She hung up the phone without another word. The official warranty threat hit Morrison Capital the very next morning. 4 heavy pages from the Vance Prestige legal department, citing contract language, warranty codes, and a warning that unauthorized computer access by an uncertified mechanic caused an irreversible voiding of that entire manufacturer extended service agreement. Right around that same time, Jason Mercer filed a compliance complaint with the Illinois Regulatory Authority against my auto shop. He listed 3 questions about manufacturer-specific electronic diagnostic access, basically begging them to launch a formal investigation. Carter Winslow called me at 9. He got straight to the bad news. This is where you and I see how the game is played. His board simply couldn't gamble a $1.4 million warranty over my 14-page independent diagnostic report. Words meant nothing. You and I know liability demands hard, undeniable paper trails. Otherwise, Morrison Capital would just eat that massive dealership invoice. Ryan begged for 48 hours. Winslow drew the line at Thursday. After hanging up, Ryan just sat at his workbench, staring, not working. He wasn't the kind of guy to get tangled in emotional corporate drama. True experience had taught him instead, since losing Diane and watching Vance Prestige operate, to just push straight through, to face friction directly, keep his hands on the problem until he found the fix. But this particular mess carried a completely different kind of weight. Far beyond a standard mechanical headache, this wasn't just a professional dispute. He handed them a technical bulletin 18 months back. Jason intentionally buried it. And during those exact 18 months, think about it, countless car owners blindly dropped 25 grand apiece for useless luxury repairs. And a dealership that knew better used its massive clout to cover its tracks, making those expensive bills look completely justified. Ryan wasn't throwing wrenches or screaming. That's not how real masters handle anger. His frustration was cold, focused, and highly deliberate. It was the sharp clarity of someone who has watched a scam go unaddressed long enough to know exactly how to gut it. He yanked his old service folder from the cabinet and got straight to work. Step 1, proving Jason Mercer fully knew about that F-47 fuse failure pattern, way before those Morrison Capital luxury cars ever rolled into the service bay. Not that he accidentally missed the diagnostic memo. He read it, understood it, and intentionally hid it. Ryan didn't even need to dig up fresh evidence to prove the cover-up. That manila folder sat waiting in his filing cabinet for 18 solid months. At 10:45 that night, he slapped both crucial documents down under his harsh bench light. There was his original warning email from the 14th of September 2022, bulletin attached, subject line begging for an urgent technical review. And Jason's dismissive reply 2 days later, 9 cold words not applicable to current inventory. Do not escalate. He snapped photos, fired them to his personal email, and secured backups in 3 spots. The second hurdle was getting outside written proof showing that pricey module in the first repaired car remained undamaged, and that the simple fuse replacement done strictly by the official manufacturer bulletin absolutely did not count as an unauthorized modification under any standard warranty fine print. He dialed up a senior Bentley Motors North America engineer, Daniel Whitfield, a guy deeply involved in writing that original service bulletin, and who verified both facts during a 14-minute call. It naturally wrapped up with a solid promise to drop a signed letter into Ryan's inbox within the hour. Meanwhile, Lucas scoured public records all evening, digging up 11 documented cases nationwide. 2022 and 2023 Bentleys with ADAS. Failures treated with massive module replacements at authorized dealers. 3 tied to Vance Prestigia, and incredibly, none showed anyone checking that F47 fuse before ordering the pricey module. By midnight, Ryan had assembled every piece. Let's be clear, into a rigid timeline no crooked manager could ever tear apart. Dealership confidence usually comes wrapped in a 42-page presentation. Margaret Holloway orchestrated this whole meeting, and she was brutally clear. Both sides in one room pitching directly to her. No lawyers spinning the narrative from the sidelines. Let's look at this together. Jason Mercer strolled in right at 11, bringing an attorney and that massive printed dealership diagnostic report, dropping it right at the head. He looked sharp, perfectly calm, and completely in his element. He had the paperwork and the heavy backing of a massive luxury franchise. This was his playground. Ryan Cole walked in entirely alone. He just dropped his laptop down, sliding a padded shipping envelope right next to it. And he tossed the burnt 47 fuse in a little plastic bag dead center on the table. He didn't bother explaining the part, and he definitely didn't greet Jason. Jason just stared at the bag, looking to Margaret without even acknowledging the mechanic. Jason pitched first. His thick report detailed the Bentley Bentayga electrical system like a guy who memorized the brochure. He listed voltage limits for every single sensor type. He talked up how solid-state modules fail under weak power conditions. A flashy theory he named latent degradation, claiming tiny stress fractures build up inside circuits getting bad voltage, doing hidden damage without throwing any real trouble codes right away. Backed by 2 quotes from automotive engineering journals. He basically claimed Ryan swapping a cheap fuse just masked the massive, expensive underlying failure. His lawyer stayed completely silent, just lurking there the way corporate lawyers do, silently looming and ready, radiating that quiet threat of massive lawsuits if things didn't go their way. Stick with me. Ryan let the silence settle fully before moving. He grabbed that little plastic bag, shoved it right into the middle, stared the dealer down and asked one thing. The expensive computer module in the fixed car was scanned 4 times over 340 miles of driving at peak engine heat, throwing absolutely 0 error codes on every single diagnostic check. Was anybody in this corporate boardroom willing to state in writing that the module was actually ruined? Dead silence. Jason stared hard at the bagged part instead of facing Ryan. The corporate lawyer nervously squirmed in his seat. Ryan flipped his laptop open toward them, showing the real proof. First, the voltage data. 90 straight minutes tracking the power feed, from a cold crank to total engine heat. The power drop at the fuse housing temp, perfectly visible in the graph. Total stability returning after the part swap. Next, the scanner tool log, showing a screen packed with 14 errors, instantly followed by 0 codes right after. The cheap fix backed by hard data from 5 entirely separate road tests. Then, an official email from Daniel Whitfield over at Bentley Motors North America, stating this service bulletin was factory approved and replacing that fuse. Under these guidelines didn't break a single warranty clause or count as some rogue modification. Finally, the drive log, 340 miles of proof across wild temperature swings. Flawless diagnostic readouts attached for every single stop. Jason forced a quiet pause before he answered. You and I know he was beat, but he still claimed it was just optional advice. He smoothly claimed the dealership's mechanics had thoroughly assessed the issue, brushing it off, saying the fix didn't fit these specific luxury SUVs. He sounded exactly like a guy used to justifying massive, unnecessary repair bills for a living. Then Ryan unsealed his envelope and slid 2 ordinary pieces of paper onto the table. The first was his direct message to Jason Mercer on September 14, 2022, with the factory warning attached. The subject line read 47 thermal failure pattern on 2022 Bentleys, recommending urgent review. The second page was Jason's quick reply from September 16, claiming it ignored their stock. Do not push this further. You and I know truth hits hard. Those pages sat under the harsh lights and the entire room stayed dead silent for 6 seconds. Isabella Vance sat quietly at the far end. Her legal pad had stayed completely blank for the last 40 minutes of the tense meeting. She studied those 2 printed emails, then slowly looked right up at Jason. Her face didn't show any trace of anger. It was the cold stillness of someone forced into a sudden, painful realization, weighing the expensive lies she had been fed against a simple paper proving the exact opposite. She never even knew these hidden messages existed. She inherited this luxury dealership and blindly trusted the management already running the expensive show. Now 2 cheap sheets of paper exposed the exact limits of that trust, bringing a clarity she couldn't ignore. Jason's lawyer quickly hid behind corporate confidentiality rules, arguing Ryan was fired, making those internal emails strictly private company property. Ryan calmly stated he printed both pages out during his time on staff, wrote one himself, and kept them securely tucked in his own toolbox. The lawyer made a weak threat, and the meeting suddenly ended without any real answers. Carter Winslow escorted Jason and his lawyer straight out to the elevator. Once those heavy doors shut, only 3 people were left behind. Isabella grabbed her blank pad and folder, walking out without saying a single word to anyone left in the room. Let's stick with Isabella. By 11:40 that night, she sat alone in that quiet building, digging through the luxury fleet repair records on the two chief executives. Level dashboard she usually ignored because Jason spoon-fed her glossy, expensive service summaries instead. Finally, she was looking right at the unpolished, raw diagnostic data. That hidden failure pattern Margaret warned about was right there, painfully obvious. All 8 cars brought in within a 4-day window, all returned in 48 hours flat. Every single one threw fault codes over the next 2 weeks as normal heat cycles, built up around the fuse block, exactly like the factory warning predicted. But one hidden detail in the parts ordering system stopped her completely cold. Jason Mercer had pushed through a purchase order for 8 expensive Bentley control modules on November 1st. But those specific cars didn't even reach the shop until November 14th. He bought the wildly expensive replacements 13 days before a mechanic ever even looked at them, found the real issue, or authorized actual repairs. Ordering parts that costly always demands a specific VIN and solid proven diagnostic proof. Instead, the log just showed the fleet account, masking it as a routine future service. A label designed for cheap everyday consumable items, not for $25,000 computer setups demanding hard proof to swap. She quietly opened the technical bulletin database. That vital bulletin was buried in the Bentayga files, marked completely useless. Look closely, initials J, dated September 12, 2022. She pulled the file's hidden edit history. Bentley Motors North America sent that crucial service bulletin on September 8, 2022, 6 days before Ryan ever sent it to Jason. Meaning Jason got the official factory dealership fix read it over. He buried it, marking it useless before Ryan's honest diagnostic report even arrived. Jason didn't just ignore Ryan's meticulous vehicle inspection. He intentionally hid the cheap factory solution first. Isabella sat in her empty office, letting that expensive lie sink in. She drove to Cole Auto at 7:15 in the morning unannounced. Real mechanics start early and the lights were blazing. Ryan was under a truck chassis when she walked in. He rolled out, a guy who actually understood car maintenance. He studied her from the floor, then stood up without an ounce of surprise. She asked to see the repaired luxury car. Washing grease from his hands, he led her straight out to the back parking lot. The Bentayga sat under a solitary light pole in the freezing morning air. He fired the engine and plugged in the auto diagnostic scanner from his pocket. They watched the system boot up together in absolute dead silence. The screen came back completely clean, 0 active or stored codes. She stared at that clean reading, seeing the truth others missed. She asked how long he survived at Vance Prestige. 4 years, he said. She asked why he really left. Fired in May 2023, he told her. She asked for the official corporate excuse. He said lack of team cohesion. Isabella didn't even respond to that. She studied the perfectly clear dashboard once more, then headed to her car. The dealership board meeting started at exactly 2 o'clock. Isabella revealed the parts order dated 2 weeks before the car arrived. The factory bulletin, signed by the service director before the luxury car ever saw Chicago. Winter, plus the customer complaint data Lucas gathered showing the exact same fault, happening at authorized dealerships nationwide and 3 specific repair cases at Vance Prestige, All done without ever checking that tiny fuse before billing massive module replacements. She added zero personal opinions. She just laid the evidence out and let the timeline expose the scam. The board unanimously ordered an internal fraud investigation and suspended Jason Mercer immediately. Security walked him out of the dealership at 4:17. They killed his security access before his feet hit the sidewalk. Let's trace the fallout. The audit took 11 weeks and almost 3 years of mechanic service records dug up 47 cases of expensive module replacements billed at massive prices when a cheap fuse or relay was the true hidden fix. The damning results were sent straight to Bentley North America Warranty Compliance and the Illinois Consumer Protection Bureau. Isabella called Ryan at 6 that evening. True to form, he was still working. She told him, "I owe you an apology for 3 things. First, I threatened lawsuits before looking at your honest diagnostics, and that was dead wrong. Second, I let the blind greed of my own company keep me from seeing the simple truth I should have spotted way before this week. Third, and I want to make this perfectly clear, regardless of the pending legal fallout, I remember her telling me she finally understood how completely unjust my treatment was back in May 2023. She said she couldn't erase the past, but she absolutely refused to ignore it anymore. I told her I appreciated hearing that. A heavy silence settled. I did not try to fill it, and neither did she. You and I know sometimes a few honest words are all it takes to fix things. That dealership finally repaired all 8 luxury fleet vehicles the very next week. They popped a fresh 47 fuse in each, testing them hot before signing off. Not a single expensive control module needed replacing. Total parts cost for the fleet was $112. Morrison Capital paid exactly nothing. The dealer covered everything, signing a legal settlement that finally admitted to the diagnostic failure and wiped out all those fake warranty claims. Margaret took the keys that Thursday, never asking for a single favor beyond our strict agreement. Over the next few weeks, Isabella completely gutted their service department. Any auto repair quote over $5,000 on an active warranty. Vehicle now required review by a mechanic totally separated from the first diagnosis. Every single factory service bulletin got shifted from casual advice to a strict requirement, demanding written proof before any tech could just casually brush it off. They posted that shady service director's job online. These shop rules changed quietly, no big announcements, which honestly spoke louder than any press release ever could. Let's look closely together. Those 47 botched jobs were not just paperwork errors. Every file meant a driver had handed over serious cash for an expensive repair they never needed, based on a diagnosis that completely ignored the actual condition of the vehicle. Instead, it just justified a massive parts order already filed. Bentley Motors North America launched a massive warranty probe, a heavy audit that dug into 4 other authorized luxury dealers nearby. Surprise, surprise, 2 of them caught the exact same dirty scams in their old logs. The Consumer Protection Bureau kept the ugliest details completely quiet. But paying the victims back eventually cost that dealership way more than the $200,000 scam that kicked this off. 2 weeks later, Margaret finally called me, handing my shop the entire Morrison Capital fleet contract. 12 cars for 1 solid year with room to renew. That contract paid enough to buy a second heavy lift before February and hire a full-time mechanic by the spring. Lucas signed his new employment letter the very same afternoon I inked that fleet deal. Neither of us celebrated the moment beyond the ink on those pages. My garage started shifting in small, highly practical ways that next month. We parked a fresh diagnostic scanner right against the wall. Our waiting area scored a proper coffee machine. I framed the official complaint summary and stuck it right above my own workbench. Unlabeled, unexplained, just sitting there. You know how you keep certain papers close? Not because you actually read them every day, but because they stand for a truth I simply refused to surrender. Even when walking away would have been the much easier route. That final Friday in November, the sky above Halid Street hung pale and dead quiet. The kind of afternoon that drifts in after a brutal stretch of weeks, empty of weather, demanding absolutely nothing from the folks walking through it. Ryan sat at his desk, wrapping up a brake job invoice when the side shop door swung open and Grace walked in. dragging her backpack by a single strap, her free hand gripping a drawing folded in thirds. She dropped it right on the edge of his desk, never mentioning it a second time. She headed to her chair in the waiting area and flipped open her homework folder. She had the cool calm of a kid raised around a working garage, totally tuned into its daily rhythm. Ryan flattened out the drawing beneath the bench light. A sketch of a shop with 2 windows, a bay door, and an entrance sign drawn in careful, unsteady kid letters. He bent it back along the original creases, resting it on the shelf above the Anita printout. Then he turned his eyes back to the invoice on his desk and finished up. That top line item on the Morrison luxury car receipt. The repaired vehicle invoice read exactly $14.00. He scribbled his name and filed it with the others. You and I know there are folks who get pushed out of rooms just for asking questions the bosses do not want answered. Yet the real answers to those questions are sitting right there in junction boxes over in Manila. Or hidden inside $14 fuses with a tiny resistance drift, stuff nobody spots unless they actually bother to look hard. Waiting with the stubborn patience of truths that stay quietly, stubbornly real, no matter who tries to sweep them under the rug. The genuine dealer quoted $200,000. Fixing it cost $14,000. The massive gap between those numbers was not some honest diagnostic mistake. Look closely. It was a daylight robbery by someone betting that most luxury car owners simply would not ask questions. The big problem with that kind of greedy math only works until the rare mechanic who actually checks things comes along. And that true expert is usually far quieter than anyone ever expects.